Lorraine Dupree was 62 years old when she fell 14 feet off a scaffolding platform onto a frozen job site in Memphis. Alone. Before dawn. The way she had shown up to every challenge in her life. She had built a $750 million construction empire from a 2-room house in rural Mississippi and a contractor's license she earned while nursing 3 children under the age of 4. When her assistant called her 4 kids from that hospital waiting room, not one of them came. Not for the first week, not for the second. Flowers arrived from her daughter, a text from her youngest, "Praying for you, Mom." Her eldest asked if it was serious. None of them asked which hospital she was in. But the moment word reached them, quietly, through the right channels, that Lorraine had changed her will, all 4 appeared. Suddenly available. Suddenly concerned. Suddenly devoted. What they didn't know was that Lorraine had spent those 8 weeks doing something far more dangerous than healing. And she was ready. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today. And if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more intense. The city was still dark when Lorraine pulled onto the site. Her headlights swept across the mud and gravel, cutting through the thin morning fog that always settled low in Shelby County this time of year. She cut the engine, sat for a moment, listened to the quiet. She liked this part, the before part. The hour before the crews arrived and the machines woke up and everyone had an opinion and a problem and a reason why something couldn't be done on schedule. In this hour, the site belonged entirely to her. Just concrete and steel and the cold smell of turned earth and the blueprints rolled under her arm. She climbed out of the truck. Her steel-toed boots found the frozen gravel, and she pulled her hard hat on without breaking stride, adjusting the strap the way she'd done 10,000 times in 30 years. The foreman had left the site lights on. Good man. She'd told him 5 a.m. and she'd meant it. The building was 4 stories at its tallest point, a mixed-use commercial project on the eastern edge of the county. Not her biggest job. But it was hers. Every beam, every pour, every contract. Hers. She unrolled the blueprints against the hood of a parked equipment truck and held them flat with both hands, reading them the way she read everything. Slowly, completely, trusting nothing to memory when the paper was right in front of her. A concrete pour was scheduled for Thursday. The timeline was tight. There was a sequence problem in Section D that the site foreman hadn't noticed yet, but that Lorraine had spotted from the revised drawings her office emailed at 9 the previous night. She'd seen it immediately. She always did. This was what she was here for. She had been here before. Not this site, but this moment. Standing in the dark on ground that wasn't finished yet, reading the shape of something that didn't exist yet, and deciding exactly how it was going to get built. She'd done it first at 29 years old, on a residential project in Walls, Mississippi, with 2 toddlers at home, and a newborn who still wasn't sleeping, and a contractor's license she'd passed her exam for on the 2nd try, while Harold quizzed her at the kitchen table after the kids went down. That project had been a single-family home, 4 bedrooms, modest lot. She had stood on that unfinished slab in the cold and thought, if I can do this one, I can do the next one. She did the next one. Then the one after that. Harold had believed in her before she fully believed in herself. He was the one who told her the company should carry her name. You're the one building it, he said. It should say so. She'd argued with him about that for almost a year. When she finally agreed, she cried in the car on the way home from the attorney's office because it scared her to be that visible. To have her name that exposed on something she could still lose. She didn't lose it. Harold died of a heart attack at 51, here one morning and gone by afternoon, and Lorraine had buried him and gone back to work 8 days later because the alternative was losing everything he had helped her build. The children were still young enough to need her completely. The company was still young enough to need the same. She poured herself into both, and told herself that was love. She still believed that. The unease had started. If she was being honest with herself, sometime in the fall. It was nothing she could point to directly. Nothing she could put in a memo or describe to Robert or quantify in any way that would satisfy her own standards for evidence. It was more like a frequency. A tone slightly off from what it should have been. Darius had canceled their last 3 lunches. Each time, a reasonable excuse. A deadline, a client, a conflict. Reasonable. But 3 times in a row was a pattern, and Lorraine had spent 30 years learning to read patterns. Camille's phone calls had gotten short. Not cold, Camille was never cold, but clipped. Efficient. Like she was managing the conversation instead of having it. Andre was always evasive, so the evasiveness itself wasn't new. What was new was that he'd started asking questions. About the Gulf Coast operation, about timelines, about who was managing what. Andre had never cared about operational details in his life. The curiosity felt borrowed, like someone had handed him a list. And Renee, sweet, careful, reasonable Renee, who called every Sunday and always asked the right questions about Lorraine's health and never seemed to want anything. Renee had started asking different questions about the Nashville properties, about the structure of the holding company, about what liquidity looked like at the parent level. Lorraine had answered her, because she was her daughter, because the questions sounded like growing interest, like maturity, like finally caring about the thing Lorraine had spent her life building. She pushed the unease down, the way she pushed most things down. Post-grief paranoia, she told herself. It had been 14 years since Harold, and grief had a long tail. She knew that. Sometimes you looked at the people you loved and saw threat where there was only distance. She trusted her children. She had given them every reason to be trustworthy. She rolled the blueprints back up and moved toward the scaffolding on the east face of the building. She needed to check the Section D framing herself. 15 minutes. Then she'd wait for the foreman. She gripped the scaffolding rail and started up. She was on the third platform when it went. No warning. No sound she could have anticipated or responded to. One moment the platform was solid beneath her boots, and the next it simply wasn't. A mechanical failure somewhere in the bracket system, a pin that should have held and didn't, and then Lorraine Dupree was falling. 14 feet. She hit the frozen ground hard, and all the air left her body at once, a complete and total erasure of breath, and the pain was everywhere and nowhere, too large to locate. She did not lose consciousness immediately. She lay still. She could not do anything else. Above her, the winter sky was pale at its edges and dark at its center, and the first thin light of morning was just beginning at the horizon. That cold, clear blue that belongs only to January, only to the hour before full dawn. She had a single strange thought. Nobody knows I'm here. Then the blue went gray, and the gray went black. She came back to the world in pieces. First the sound, a low, constant hum of machines she didn't recognize. Then the light, too bright and too white and coming from the wrong direction. Then the pain, which arrived all at once and without mercy, spreading from her back through her left arm and settling into her chest like something heavy had been placed there and forgotten. She opened her eyes. The ceiling was hospital white. The room smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. And Vivian Carter was sitting in the chair beside her bed with her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and her hands folded in her lap so tightly that her knuckles had gone pale. Vivian was not a woman who showed fear. In 19 years, Lorraine had seen her handle contractor disputes, board tantrums, a Category 3 hurricane that hit a Gulf Coast project mid-construction, and one very bad audit. She had handled all of it the same way, straight-backed, clear-eyed, steady. She did not look steady now. "Hey," Lorraine said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Vivian exhaled like she'd been holding that breath for hours. Maybe she had. "Hey yourself," she said. "You broke your back." "Which part?" "2 vertebrae, L2 and L3. Your wrist is shattered. They said your left lung took a bruise that they want to watch." Vivian paused. "You fell 14 feet, Lorraine." Lorraine processed that. She looked down at her left arm, wrapped and elevated, and noted the weight of it, the strange, foreign heaviness of a limb that had become a problem. "The children," she said. Vivian's expression shifted. Something crossed her face quickly. Too quickly. And then it was gone, tucked back behind the professional composure that she wore like a second skin. "I called them," she said. "All 4. Lorraine waited. "Darius said he has a deadline on the Cordova project. He said he'll come when things calm down." The room was very quiet. Renee said Greg is dealing with something. She said it's a bad time. Vivian cleared her throat. "She's sending flowers." Lorraine's eyes stayed on the ceiling. "Andre asked me." Vivian stopped, started again. Andre asked if it was serious. And Camille. She didn't pick up. She texted back about 40 minutes later. Vivian reached for her phone, then seemed to decide against reading it aloud. She said she's praying for you, that you should let her know if you need anything. The room held that information for a moment. Lorraine said nothing. She moved her right hand slowly and found the edge of the blanket and straightened it. A small, precise adjustment that had nothing to do with the blanket. The flowers from Renee came on the third day. They were beautiful, cream and blush, professionally arranged with a card that said, "Thinking of you and praying for a full recovery. Love always. R&G." Lorraine read the card once and set it on the tray table and did not look at it again. Nothing else came. Days passed the way. Days pass when the body is broken and the only thing to do is lie still and let time work. Slowly, stubbornly, with long empty stretches in the middle of the night where the mind had nothing to do but think. Lorraine thought. She did not cry. She had promised herself, somewhere in the fog of the first night, that she would not cry about this, and she kept that promise the way she kept all her promises, without drama, without exception. The stillness that settled over her was not grief, and it was not rage. It was something quieter and more permanent than either of those things. It was the feeling of a woman who has been handed a piece of information she wishes she did not have, and who now has to decide what to do with it. She stared at the ceiling. She watched the light change. She listened to the sounds of the floor beyond her door. The soft-soled shoes of the nurses, the distant murmur of the intercom, the occasional clatter of a cart. And she thought about the people she had built her life for. She thought about Darius's excuses, each one so reasonable standing alone. She thought about Renee's flowers, sitting in their vase, bright and pointless. She thought about Andre's voice on the phone. Serious, like there were degrees of his mother broken on a frozen job site that might or might not require his presence. She thought about Camille's text. 40 minutes. Praying for you. On the 5th day, Vivian came in the morning with coffee and the mail and that same careful look she'd been wearing since the beginning. Lorraine watched her set things down and organize them the way she always did, and then she asked the only question she'd been sitting with. Did any of them ask which hospital? Vivian went still. She didn't reach for anything. She didn't adjust her glasses or check her phone or do any of the small things people do when they need a moment. She just went still. Then quietly, "No." Lorraine nodded. She turned her head toward the window. Outside, the January sky was the same pale, cold blue it had been the morning she fell, clear and indifferent and going on forever in every direction. She looked at it for a long time. She said nothing more. Something inside her closed. It closed the way a vault closes, not with violence, not with noise, but with a soft, final sound that meant the combination had changed and would not be shared again. 2 weeks in, the boredom became its own kind of pain. The body was healing, slowly, stubbornly on its own schedule, but Lorraine's mind did not know how to rest. It had never learned. She had spent 62 years feeding it problems and watching it work, and now there were no problems to give it. Only a white ceiling and the soft sounds of a building that was not hers, and a left arm she still couldn't fully use. She lasted 14 days before she called Vivian in and asked for the quarterly financial summary. "I need something to read," she said. "Bring me the Q3 package. The full one, not the executive summary." Vivian didn't argue. She didn't say you should be resting or the team has it handled, or any of the other things that people who didn't know Lorraine might have said. She just nodded and said she'd bring it the next morning. She brought it the next morning, and she hesitated before she handed it over. It was a small thing. A half-second pause, the folder already extended, before it completed its journey across the space between them. Most people would not have noticed it. Lorraine noticed everything. She took the folder without commenting on the pause. She set it in her lap and opened it with her right hand, her good hand, and began to read. The quarterly summary for Dupree and Associates ran 41 pages when you included the subsidiary reports. Lorraine had been reading documents like this for 30 years. She knew the rhythm of them, the way the numbers were supposed to sit on the page, the categories that were fixed and the ones that moved. She read the way she always read, not quickly, but completely, the way you move through a building you own, opening every door. She was on page 22 when she found it. It was a line item in the subsidiary ledger under the Gulf Coast Division's operational expenses, filed under a broad heading called Contracted Professional Services, small enough to miss if you were reading fast, consistent enough to be invisible if you were reading for totals. Consulting. Architectural Review Services. LLG Architectural Partners, LLC. She looked at the figure beside it. She looked at the date range beneath it. She turned back 3 pages and found it again, smaller, in a different quarter. Then she went to the Property Division report and found it there too. 7 years. 14 separate payments of varying amounts, ranging from $18,000 to $41,000, spread across different subsidiaries, different quarters, different expense categories. The kind of pattern you would only see if you were looking for a pattern. The total, when she added it in her head, was $340,000. She sat with that number for a moment. She did not recognize the contract. She had not authorized any architectural review consulting arrangement with any entity called LLG Architectural Partners LLC. Not 7 years ago, not ever. She would have remembered. She remembered every contract she signed. It was the thing her financial officers used to joke about. Don't try to slip anything past Lorraine. She's got every number she's ever seen filed somewhere behind those eyes. She turned to Vivian, who was sitting in the chair by the window pretending to scroll through her phone. Get me the state filing for LLG Architectural Partners LLC, Lorraine said. Registered agent information. Vivian looked up. The pretending stopped. Lorraine. Today, please. The filing came back in 2 hours. A single page, printed clean, the way official documents always looked. Neat and plain and carrying information that had no idea what it was carrying. The registered agent for LLG Architectural Partners LLC was listed as Darius M. Dupree. Lorraine read it once. She read it again. Then she set the paper down on the tray table, very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands want to do something else entirely. She turned toward the window. The January sky outside was flat and gray today, the kind of gray that didn't promise anything. No storm, no clearing, just a low ceiling of cloud pressing down over the city. She looked at it for a long time. Vivian did not say anything. She understood, after 19 years, that there were moments when the most useful thing she could do was stay in the room and stay quiet. This was one of those moments. When Lorraine finally turned back, her face was composed. Completely, deliberately composed. The same face she had worn at contract tables and probate hearings, and the morning they buried Harold. The face that showed the world exactly nothing while everything behind it ran at full speed. Get me Robert, she said. Tell him I need him here tomorrow morning. Early. She slept badly that night. She did not sleep at all, in truth. She lay in the dark with her eyes open, and her mind doing what her mind always did with a problem. Breaking it into its pieces, turning each piece over, setting it in relation to the others. By the time the floor outside her door began its first quiet sounds of morning, she had turned it over enough times to know its shape completely. Robert Ellison arrived at 7:45, earlier than she'd asked. He was 61 and careful, with the kind of face that had learned not to react to things before it had thought about them. He sat down, set his leather case on the floor, and looked at her. Tell me, he said. She told him 2 things. First, she wanted a full forensic accounting of every entity within Dupree and Associates, every subsidiary, every contract, every payment made in the last 7 years. She wanted it done by an outside firm, someone with no existing relationship to the company, and she wanted it done quietly enough that no one inside the building would know it was happening until she decided they should. Second, she wanted to change her will, immediately. Robert would keep the new document sealed until she gave him further instruction. Robert listened to both things without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once, the nod of a man who understood the weight of what he'd just been handed. Then Lorraine looked at him and asked the question she'd been sitting with since somewhere around 3 a.m. How fast does news of a will change travel in a family like mine? Robert was quiet for a moment. He had 3 adult children of his own. He knew exactly what she was asking. Fast, he said. Lorraine nodded slowly. Good, she said. The phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the will was changed. Lorraine was in the middle of her physical therapy exercises, slow rotations of her wrist, each one pulling at something deep, when Vivienne knocked and held the phone out with a particular expression. Not alarmed, just watchful. Lorraine set down the resistance band and took the phone. "Mama." Renee's voice came through warm and close, the way it used to sound before Greg and the years and whatever else had quietly built itself between them. "I've been thinking about you so much. I feel terrible that I haven't been out there. I want to come see you. If you're up for it. If you're up for it." Lorraine almost smiled. "Of course, baby," she said. "Come whenever you can. I'd love to see your face." She meant one of those sentences. Andre called 2 days later, on a Thursday. He was cheerful the way he always was. Voice up, energy high, the charm switched on and running at full power. He asked how she was feeling, said he'd been meaning to call, said he'd been all over the place with work. He wanted to come that weekend if that worked. "That works just fine," Lorraine said. Camille texted first, then called when Lorraine didn't respond quickly enough. Her voice was careful, measured. She offered to bring food from that Creole place on Beale Street that Lorraine liked, the one with the good étouffée. "That sounds wonderful," Lorraine said. "You don't have to go to any trouble." Camille said it was no trouble at all. Darius called last. He always moved last. That had always been his way, waiting to see which direction the wind was blowing before he walked into it. His voice was smooth and authoritative, the voice he used in professional settings, which told her something right there. He said the visit was overdue. He said that, like he was acknowledging a scheduling conflict rather than 8 weeks of silence while his mother lay in a hospital bed with 2 fractured vertebrae and a shattered wrist and a bruised lung that still ached when she breathed too deep in the cold. "It is," Lorraine agreed pleasantly. "Come soon." She hung up and sat with the phone in her lap. Vivienne was in the doorway. "All 4?" she asked. "All 4," Lorraine said. Vivienne's jaw tightened slightly. She turned toward the window, and Lorraine gave her the moment. 19 years had taught her when Vivienne needed one. "I want the visits staggered," Lorraine said, when Vivienne turned back. "Each one comes separately. No overlap, no coordination, and none of them should know the others have already been." Vivienne nodded, already reaching for her planner. "You'll need to manage the scheduling so it reads natural," Lorraine continued. "Different days, enough space between them. I don't want anyone comparing notes before I'm ready for them to." "Understood." Vivienne wrote something down, then looked up. "Anything else?" "Yes." Lorraine settled back against the pillows and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "I want you to pay attention when they're here. Watch what they do while I'm talking. Where they look. What they touch. Whether they get up to use the bathroom at convenient moments." Vivienne looked at her steadily. "I'll be here." The visits came one by one, like chapters in a book Lorraine was both reading and writing at the same time. She was never less than gracious. She accepted the food Camille brought and said it smelled wonderful. She laughed at Andre's stories. She asked Renee about the grandchildren by name, each one, and watched Renee's face soften with surprise that she remembered which one had the soccer tournament coming up. But underneath every conversation, quiet and invisible, was the other conversation, the one only Lorraine was conducting. She asked questions that sounded like a mother catching up. "How's the firm doing? Are you still working with that group down in Mobile? How are things on Greg's end?" And she listened not just to the answers, but to the shape of them. The pauses, the places where someone changed the subject just a half beat too smoothly. She watched their eyes when they talked about the company, about money, about the future. She watched whether they looked at her wrist brace or looked away from it. She noticed that Andre looked away from it every time. She noticed that Renee asked about the estate twice and called it the estate, a word none of her children had ever used before about her things. She noticed that Camille's hands were very still in her lap the entire visit, the careful stillness of someone managing themselves. She filed every observation away in the same place she filed everything, behind her eyes, in the dark, where it kept. Darius's visit lasted 2 hours. He was polished. He brought flowers, good ones, not the grocery store kind. And he sat straight in the chair and spoke about the company with the easy authority of a man who had already decided it belonged to him. When he left, Lorraine sat quietly while Vivienne walked him out. Vivienne came back and stood in the doorway. Well? She asked. He never once asked how the fall happened, Lorraine said. Vivienne was still for a moment. What does that mean? Lorraine looked at the door her son had just walked through. It means, she said, that he was already thinking about what comes after me. Robert arrived at 2:20 on a Wednesday, which was not his scheduled day. Lorraine noticed that immediately. Robert did not make unscheduled visits. In 23 years, he had shown up without warning exactly twice, once when Harold died, and once when a contractor filed a fraudulent lien that threatened to tie up a $12 million project. Both times he had worn the same expression he was wearing now, calm on the surface, tight underneath. Andre was already there. He'd arrived that morning with good energy and a bag of beignets from a place he claimed was the best in Memphis, which Lorraine doubted but did not say. He was in good form today, loose and funny, story after story, filling the room the way he always did, his voice bouncing off the walls while Lorraine sat in her chair and smiled and listened and watched. When Robert appeared in the doorway, Lorraine looked at him for just a moment, long enough to read him, not long enough to signal anything. "Robert," she said warmly. "What a nice surprise. You remember Andre." Robert shook Andre's hand. His expression did not change. "Good to see you. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just need a few minutes with your mother on some paperwork. Nothing urgent." He paused. "Would you mind giving us a moment?" Andre was already pushing up from his chair with the easy generosity of a man who had no reason to feel threatened. No, I'll go get us some coffee. Mama, you want coffee? Robert, you want anything?" "I'm fine, thank you," Robert said. "Black," Lorraine said. "No sugar." "You got it." Andre pointed at her like they'd made a deal and walked out, his footsteps easy and unhurried down the hall. Robert waited until the sound of them faded. Then he crossed the room and placed a manila folder on Lorraine's tray table without a word. She opened it. The document on top was a non-disclosure agreement. Clean formatting, professional letterhead, signed 11 months ago. She read the name of the other party, Meridian Partners Construction Group. She turned to the second page and read the clause that Robert had marked with a small paperclip. The language was precise, and she read it precisely, the way she read every contract, slowly, without rushing the understanding. In the agreement, Andre Dupree was identified as a representative of Dupree and Associates Construction Group, and here was the phrase, operational authority over subsidiary holdings including but not limited to the Gulf Coast Regional Division. She read that sentence twice. The Gulf Coast subsidiary. The one she had built from 4 employees, and a single contract in Biloxi in 2009. The one that now carried $47 million in assessed value and had contracts running through 2028. She turned to the third page. The negotiation had been ongoing. 11 months of correspondence, site assessments, proposed transfer terms. Andre had been careful. Not careful enough, but careful. He had never put anything in writing that explicitly promised a transfer. He had simply behaved, on paper and in person, like a man who had the right to make one happen. Lorraine read to the end of the document. Then she closed the folder. She looked at the window. Outside, the sky was flat and white, the way Memphis skies got in February, not storming, just sealed. She opened the drawer of her bedside table and placed the folder inside. She closed the drawer. Then she settled her hands in her lap and looked at the door. Robert sat in the chair Andre had left empty and said nothing. He had been her attorney for 23 years. He knew when she needed the silence. They waited. Andre came back 4 minutes later, moving carefully with 2 cups, steam rising from both. He handed Lorraine hers with a small flourish and dropped back into the chair across from her, crossing one ankle over his knee, comfortable and unworried in the way that only a man with no idea what was in that drawer could be. "Everything good?" he asked, looking between them. "Everything's fine," Lorraine said. She wrapped both hands around the cup. The brace on her left wrist made it awkward, but she managed, and looked at her son. "Tell me something. How are my grandbabies doing? Jalen still playing ball?" And just like that, Andre's face opened up completely. The professional politeness dropped away, and what replaced it was something that might have been the truest thing about him, the genuine warmth of a man who did, in fact, love his children. "Oh, he is something else," Andre said, laughing a little. "Mama, you would not believe this kid. He's only 9 and he's out there playing with the 12-year-olds. Coach had to. Lorraine listened. She nodded. She asked a follow-up question about his daughter, whose name was Simone, and who, according to Andre, had recently decided she wanted to be a marine biologist. Smart girl, Lorraine said. Takes after her grandmother, Andre said, and smiled at her with all of his considerable charm. Everything's great, Mama, he said. Everything is really great, Lorraine smiled back. After he left, the room went quiet. Lorraine set down her coffee cup. She opened the bedside drawer, took out the folder, and looked at the document again without opening it, just held it in her hands for a moment, looking at the name on the front. Then she looked at Robert. Contact Meridian Partners, she said. Inform them that Andre had no legal authority to negotiate on behalf of this company. No operational authority. No representative authority. No authority of any kind. She set the folder back in the drawer and closed it. The deal is dead. She said it the way she would tell a supplier their contract was being terminated. Even. Final. Businesslike. Robert uncapped his pen and wrote it down. Renee arrived on a Thursday morning with 2 tote bags, a fruit arrangement wrapped in cellophane, and a smile that had clearly been practiced in the car. She was pretty in the way she had always been pretty, careful about it, deliberate. Her hair was done, her blouse was pressed. She came into the room with her arms open and her voice already warm, and Lorraine let herself be hugged and said how good it was to see her, and meant none of it and showed none of that. Mama, you look so much better than I expected, Renee said, pulling back and holding Lorraine's face in both hands the way she used to when the girls were small and playing doctor. She looked her mother over with an expression of tender concern that was almost perfect. You really do. You had me so worried. I'm fine, Lorraine said. Sit down. They talked for a while about ordinary things, the grandchildren, the weather, a cousin's recent wedding that Lorraine had not attended because she had been in this facility, a fact neither of them named directly. Renee was good at this, the comfortable surface of a conversation, the way she could keep it moving without ever landing anywhere that required honesty. She had always been the one her siblings called to smooth things over, the peacemaker, the reasonable one. Lorraine knew exactly how dangerous that was. Around 11:30, she shifted in her chair and let some tiredness show in her face. Not much, just enough. She pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck the way she did when a headache was starting. Renee leaned forward immediately. You need to rest. We can stop. No. Lorraine waved it off. I'm fine. I've just been doing a lot of thinking. About the restructuring. About what makes sense going forward. She paused. Let her eyes go to the window. I've been thinking about liquidating the Nashville holdings, actually. The market has shifted up there, and I'm not sure it's worth holding on to. I may just let them go. She said it casually. The way you mention a change in dinner plans. Renee's expression stayed warm. Interested, but not too interested. Really, she said. Is that a big move for the company? Manageable, Lorraine said. It's just a matter of timing. She shook her head a little as if clearing it. Anyway, enough about work. Tell me about the kids. Renee told her about the kids. Robert called 71 hours later. He didn't come in person this time. He called, which meant it was straightforward enough to deliver without sitting across from her. Or perhaps it meant the opposite. I received an inquiry this morning, he said. A financial advisory firm out of Atlanta. They represent a private investment group. They're asking about the availability of the Nashville holdings, specifically, by name. Lorraine was quiet for a moment. Who does the investment group belong to? The filing lists several partners. A brief pause. Greg Holland is among them. She didn't say anything. She looked at the window. The sky was doing the same thing it had been doing all week. Flat, white, sealed shut. Lorraine, Robert said. The inquiry was detailed. They knew the specific parcels. They knew the assessed values. This wasn't a general market inquiry. No, she said. It wasn't. She thought about Renee's face when she said it. The warmth of it. How perfectly still it had stayed. Robert. Her voice was level. How long do you think this has been happening? He didn't answer right away. She could hear him on the other end, the particular quiet of a man choosing his words with care. "I went back through the external inquiry logs for the company," he said. "Inquiries from outside parties about holdings, subsidiaries, asset valuations. Things I didn't think much of at the time because they were indirect enough to seem like ordinary market interest." "How far back?" Another pause. "I believe it may have started," he said quietly, "around the time of Harold's funeral." The room went completely still, not the stillness of shock. Lorraine did not shock easily, and she had spent enough time in this bed preparing herself for difficult information that she had built something like armor around the softest parts of her thinking. But this was different from Andre's deal, and different from Darius's invoices, because those were her children taking from her, greedy and wrong, but at least she was the target. This was Harold. They had started while Harold was still being lowered into the ground. While she was still standing at the graveside in her black dress with her 4 children around her, believing, in the way that grief sometimes forces you to believe impossible things, that loss makes families hold tighter. She set the phone down after saying goodbye to Robert and did not move for a while. Then she picked it up again and called Vivienne. "I need you to bring me something from the office," she said. "Harold's photograph. The one on my desk. The silver frame." Vivienne arrived the following morning. She didn't ask questions. She came through the door with the photograph held carefully in both hands, the silver frame catching the light from the hallway, and she set it on the tray table in front of Lorraine and stepped back. Lorraine picked it up. Harold looked back at her the way he always had in this photograph, one eyebrow slightly raised, a half smile, like he was about to say something that would make her laugh. She had taken the picture herself at a company dinner in 2007. He had no idea she was doing it. That was why she had always loved it. She held it for a long moment. Then she set it down, facing her, so she could see him while she worked. "They started while we were still burying him," she said. Then she picked up her pen and went back to work. Diana Morse arrived at 10 in the morning with a black leather portfolio, a thumb drive, and no small talk. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s with reading glasses pushed up into her natural hair and the unhurried manner of someone who had delivered bad news so many times that she had stopped bracing for it. She set her portfolio on the tray table, opened it without ceremony, and arranged 3 printed documents in a neat row in front of Lorraine. Robert sat in the chair to Lorraine's left. He had already seen the findings. His face showed the careful stillness of a man holding something heavy and not letting it drop. "I'll walk you through the structure first," Diana said. "Then the documentation, then my conclusions." Lorraine nodded once. "Go ahead," Diana began. The invoices for the consulting architectural review services payments were the entry point. Lorraine already knew that much. What she did not yet know was how they had been built. Diana laid it out with quiet precision. 7 years of payments, spread across 3 separate LLC accounts, timed to fall just below the threshold that triggered automatic internal review. Each invoice corresponded to an actual Dupree project. Real dates, real site addresses, real contract numbers. That was the craft of it. Anyone reviewing the payments would find a real project attached to everyone. "This level of invoice structuring," Diana said, tapping the first document, "is not something an architect does. An architect might move money, but this..." She touched the second document. "This is how a CPA thinks. The cross-referencing of project codes, the use of existing contract language as cover, the sequencing of payments across fiscal quarters to avoid triggering review thresholds." She paused. "Whoever structured this understood exactly how your internal audit process works and built around it." Lorraine looked at the documents. She already knew where this was going. She had known for several days, in the way you sometimes know something you cannot yet prove, the way you feel a change in a foundation before you can see the crack. She let Diana finish. "The paper trail connects to a second party through the LLC's formation documents," Diana continued. "A registered accountant assisted in the entity setup and provided the invoice templates. I can document the connection through the template formatting, the filing signatures, and a shared document server that was used to pass files between the LLC and the accounting contact." She set the third document in front of Lorraine. "The accountant is Camille Dupree." The room was very quiet. "She didn't simply know about the embezzlement," Diana said, her voice staying even and professional, delivering fact without embellishment. She engineered the concealment. Based on the architecture she built, I can say with confidence that without a forensic review of this specific type, the transfer trail would have become effectively untraceable within approximately 18 months of... She stopped briefly. Within 18 months of a significant change in company leadership. She meant death. They all knew what she meant. Diana clicked her portfolio closed. She looked at Lorraine directly. "Do you have questions for me?" "Not right now," Lorraine said. "Would you give us the room for a few minutes?" Diana nodded, gathered nothing, and walked out, pulling the door shut behind her with a soft, final click. Lorraine did not speak right away. Robert waited. He had learned, in 23 years, that her silences were not empty. They were where she did her most serious thinking, and interrupting them was never useful. The room held nothing but the low hum of the building's heating system and the far-off sound of a cart rolling down the hallway outside. Lorraine looked at Harold's photograph on the tray table. Then she looked down at the 3 documents Diana had left. Nearly a full minute passed. "I'm not pursuing criminal charges against Camille," she said. Robert didn't respond immediately. "Lorraine, I know what you're going to say." Her voice was quiet and absolutely certain. "I know what the documentation supports. I know what Robert Ellison, the attorney, thinks the correct legal course of action is." She looked at him. "I'm telling you what I'm going to do." He held her gaze. Then he nodded. "She is my child," Lorraine said. "And I will not make my family into a public tragedy for people to read about and discuss and use to say whatever they need to say about us. I will not do that." She paused. "Not for her sake, for mine. For Harold's name. For what I built." She straightened slightly in her chair. "I want this handled in one room, by me, directly. No courtrooms, no press, no story that gets bigger than I can control." Robert was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. "Call Diana back in," Lorraine said. "I want to thank her, and then I need you to do something." Robert reached for his notepad. "I'm being discharged next week," she said. "I want a meeting at the house, all 4 of them, the dining room." She paused. "Tell Darius it concerns redefining leadership roles in the company. Tell Renee it's about updating the family property distributions. Tell Andre the Gulf Coast subsidiary may be coming available for internal management." She looked at Robert steadily. "Tell Camille I want her involved in restructuring the financial oversight going forward." Robert wrote it all down without comment. "Make sure they all expect something," she said. "Make sure they all come." She looked back at Harold's photograph. "Set the table," she said. "I'll finish it." The rehabilitation facility's front doors opened at 9 in the morning, and Lorraine walked out of them the same way she had walked into every room for the last 40 years. First, chin level, eyes forward. Vivian had pulled the car around. She reached for Lorraine's bag. Lorraine was already carrying it. The drive back to Memphis took 40 minutes. Lorraine spent most of it looking out the passenger window at the flat winter fields running along either side of the highway, bare and gray and wide open. Vivienne kept the radio off without being asked. She understood, after 19 years, the difference between a silence that needed filling and a silence that needed protecting. They pulled into the driveway just before 10. The house was a large, serious brick colonial on a quiet street in East Memphis. The kind of house that looked like it had been built with intention. Because it had been. Harold had picked the lot. Lorraine had designed the layout. They had argued cheerfully about the kitchen for 6 months. She had won. She stood on the front steps for a moment and looked at it. Then she went inside. She did not rest. That first afternoon she walked every room in the house slowly, the way she walked a job site before a project started, noting what needed attention, cataloging what was in order. The limp was there. She did not favor it. She moved through it, her jaw set, her pace deliberate, until the movement felt less like compensation and more like simply walking. The formal dining room had not been used in over a year. The table was dusty. The curtains were drawn. She opened the curtains herself. She had the table cleaned and set by the end of the first day, not with a dinner service, but with what was needed. Legal pads, 1 at each seat, pens, water glasses, filled, a single yellow notepad at the head of the table where she would sit. She stood at the head and looked down the length of the table for a long time. thinking about nothing she would have been able to put into words. Then she went to bed. The second day she spent on the phone with Robert, confirming that all 4 children had confirmed their attendance. They had. She spent an hour reviewing Diana Morse's final documentation one more time, not because she had forgotten anything. She had not forgotten a single number, a single date, a single name, but because she wanted every fact sitting in the front of her mind when she walked into that room. Not retrieved, just present, the way a contractor knows the load tolerance of a beam before she sets foot on the floor above it. The morning of the meeting, she dressed carefully. Deep burgundy blazer over a cream blouse, pressed slacks, low block heels she hadn't worn in 2 months. Her hair done the way she wore it for board meetings, neat, close, no apology. She stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself for a moment. The wrist was still braced. The limp would be there. She walked out of the bedroom without adjusting for either. Robert arrived first, at noon, with his leather briefcase and the sealed envelope he had been holding for 3 weeks. He set the briefcase beside the chair to Lorraine's left. They did not discuss the plan. There was nothing left to discuss. Vivian came next. She brought coffee and set it on the sideboard and took her seat at the table without being directed. She sat with her hands folded and her face composed. 19 years of composed faces, though Lorraine could read the quiet fury underneath it, the way you could read weather before it arrived. Diana Morse came last, before the children. She set her black portfolio on the table to Lorraine's right, adjusted her reading glasses, and sat down. She asked no questions. She was there as a fact. Everyone in the room would know it. Darius arrived at 1:15, confident, dressed well, smelling of expensive aftershave. He took in the room, Robert, Vivian, the unfamiliar woman with the portfolio, and adjusted his expression so quickly that a person watching casually might have missed it. His smile settled back into place. Renee came 10 minutes later with a dish covered in foil, warm in her hands. When she saw her brother already seated, something moved through her face, a quick recalibration. She set the dish on the sideboard and took the chair across from him without comment. Andre arrived with a paper bag and the particular energy of a man who believed he was about to receive good news. He sat down, looked around the table, and said nothing, which was unusual for him. Camille came last. She stood in the doorway for a moment before entering, her eyes moving over the room slowly, counting the people. Her gaze reached Diana's portfolio and stayed there a half-second too long before she sat. They were all there by 1:40. The room made small, careful sounds, the creak of chairs, the soft shift of water glasses, the quiet that people manufacture when they are not comfortable. Lorraine waited until every person was still. Then she said, "Thank you all for coming. I know you've each got your own lives and your own schedules, and I appreciate you making the time." She looked down the table. Her voice was level, unhurried, warm even, but not performed. The warmth they were each showing her was performed. Hers was something older and cooler than that. It was the calm of someone who has already decided. "I've been thinking carefully about my legacy," she said. "About what I've built. About what I want it to mean when I'm gone." She paused. "And I have some things I want to say to each of you before we talk about any of that." She looked at each of them in turn, one face at a time. "But first," she said, and her voice didn't rise, didn't sharpen, just settled like something placed deliberately on a table. "I want to tell you what I learned while I was lying in that bed for 8 weeks that none of you came to." The room went completely silent. Lorraine placed her hands flat on the table. She looked at Darius first. Darius. His name in her mouth was not a greeting and not an accusation. It was simply a beginning. "I'm going to slide something across to you now. I want you to look at it." She pushed a single sheet of paper down the table toward him. He reached for it slowly, the way a man reaches for something when he already knows, on some level, what it is. It was the forensic summary. 1 page, clean columns, 7 years of payments. The LLC name printed in plain black text at the top. His eyes moved across it. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. $340,000, Lorraine said. 7 years. Your LLC. You structured it as architectural consulting, which was smart, because most people reviewing a ledger at that level would move right past it. She paused. "I reviewed it myself." Darius opened his mouth. I'm not asking for an explanation, she said. Her voice was entirely calm. I have the explanation. I hired people to get it for me, and they did. What I'm telling you now is what has already been done. She folded her hands. Your name has been removed from every company document, every succession instrument, and every internal authorization. Legal counsel has been notified and the forensic materials are in their file. What happens next on the legal side is not in my hands. It is in yours. He stared at her. She had already moved on. She reached into the folder beside her and set a second document on the table. She slid it not to Andre, but to the center, where everyone could see it. This is a non-disclosure agreement, she said. Andre signed it with Meridian Partners 11 months ago. In it, he represented himself as having operational authority over the Gulf Coast subsidiary. She looked at Andre directly. He did not have that authority. He has never had that authority. No one gave it to him, and he did not ask. Andre's expression had gone carefully blank. The paper bag he'd brought was still on the sideboard. He hadn't touched the coffee. I want you to understand something, Lorraine said, and her tone did not shift by a degree. Meridian Partners has been contacted by my legal team. They have been informed in full. The deal is void, and the misrepresentation of authority has been disclosed through the appropriate channels in this industry. She paused. The Gulf Coast subsidiary is being placed into a management trust. It will not be accessible to any of my children in any capacity. Not now, not later. Andre said nothing. For once in his life, he had nothing to offer the room. Lorraine turned to Renee. Renee had not moved since Lorraine began speaking. Her hands were in her lap. The foil-covered dish on the sideboard was still warm. Renee. A brief pause. When you came to visit me last month, I told you I was thinking about liquidating the Nashville holdings because the market had shifted. Do you remember that? Renee's expression stayed composed, but something behind her eyes shifted. A very small door closing. I told only you, Lorraine said. Not Robert. Not Vivienne. No one else in this company or in this family. Only you, and only in that room. She let that sit for exactly 1 second. Within 72 hours, Robert received an inquiry from a financial advisory firm representing Greg's investment group asking about the availability of those holdings. The room was absolutely still. I said it because I needed to know, Lorraine said. Not because I had doubts I couldn't name. I already had the doubts. I needed the confirmation. Her eyes did not leave Renee's face. The Nashville holdings are not being liquidated. I want you to know that specifically. Renee's chin lifted slightly, the way a person lifts their chin when they are trying not to show that they've been struck. You have been removed from the estate, Lorraine said. That was done 6 weeks ago. This conversation is not a negotiation. It is a courtesy, so you leave this room knowing exactly why. Then Lorraine turned to Camille. She did not reach for any document. She did not look at Diana's portfolio. She looked at her youngest child, and she was quiet for a moment that felt different from the other pauses. Heavier, like something being carried to the surface. Camille, she said, I drove you to every accounting exam. Did you know I kept every score letter you ever got? I have them in a box. Every single one. Her voice stayed level, but something in it was different now. Not softer, not harder, just more precise. The way a blade is more precise than a blunt instrument. I told you your mind was your greatest asset. I said it because I believed it. I still believe it. She let that land. The forensic accountant sitting at this table, Lorraine said, has documented in full the role you played in structuring what your brother took from this company. The invoices were too clean, Camille, too precise. We knew immediately it was someone who understood exactly what they were doing. She paused. You built it to be untraceable after I was gone. You built it to survive my death. Camille's eyes were filling. I am not filing criminal charges, Lorraine said. Not because I forgive you. I want to be clear about that. I am not forgiving you today, and I don't know if that will ever come. I am choosing not to file because I will not allow this family to become a story people tell about what can go wrong. Her voice did not waver. But I am removing you from my life. Not as punishment. As a choice I am making for my own peace. You do not get to call that mercy. Camille pressed her lips together. A single tear ran down the left side of her face. Lorraine looked at her for one more moment. Then she nodded once, the way you nod when something is confirmed, and turned back to the table. "Robert," she said. Robert opened the sealed envelope. He read slowly, with the authority of a man who had prepared something airtight and knew it. The estate, all of it, $750 million in assets, the company, the properties, the trusts, every instrument she had spent 30 years building, passed to two entities. The first was the Harold Dupree Foundation, which would fund vocational training, contractor licensing programs, and small business grants for Black women across Mississippi, Tennessee, and Arkansas. Lorraine would chair it during her lifetime. Upon her death, the chair would pass to Vivian. The second was a generation-skipping trust for Lorraine's grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Funds would be accessible only upon reaching the age of 30, with documented evidence of financial independence, and a notarized declaration of no legal or financial involvement with any of Lorraine's 4 children. The grandchildren could inherit. Their parents would receive nothing. Robert set the document down. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Darius said, "This can be contested." Robert looked at him with the particular patience of a man who has spent 23 years preparing for exactly this sentence. "You are welcome to try," he said. Lorraine set her palms on the table and stood. "There is a full meal in the kitchen," she said, and her voice carried no anger, no satisfaction, nothing theatrical at all. "I was raised with manners, and I will not put you out of this house hungry." She straightened her blazer. "But when you are finished, I would appreciate it if you left, and I would ask that you not return without an invitation from me directly." She picked up her notepad from the table. She walked to the door. She did not look back. 3 years is a long time to build something. It is also a long time to watch other people come apart. Lorraine pulled into the Nashville site at 5:47 in the morning. The sky was still dark, that particular shade of deep blue that exists only in the minutes before the city decides to wake up. Her headlights swept across a field of equipment: 2 tower cranes, a concrete pump, 4 excavators parked in a row like patient animals. The steel skeleton of the mixed-use development rose against the darkness in pieces. 12 floors already framed, 8 more to go. It was the biggest project Dupree and Associates had ever taken on. She sat in the car for a moment and looked at it. Then she got out, pulled on her hard hat, and walked toward the site trailer. The Harold Dupree Foundation had funded 340 contractor licenses in 3 years. Mississippi, Tennessee, Arkansas. Every one of them a woman who needed a path and found one. The waiting list ran to 60 names, and Lorraine had already begun working with Robert on expanding the grant pool. Vivian ran the foundation's operations with the same clean efficiency she'd brought to 19 years of running Lorraine's professional life. She did not need managing. She never had. Dupree and Associates had posted its best revenue year on record 12 months ago. Lorraine had spent the better part of 2 years rebuilding the leadership team from scratch. People she chose herself, people who had earned it, people who did not come with the particular entitlement that came from sharing her last name. The new CFO was a woman named Patricia who had worked her way up through a competitor's firm and could read a financial summary faster than anyone Lorraine had ever hired. The new VP of operations was a man named Curtis, who asked better questions than he answered, which Lorraine had always considered the highest form of professional intelligence. The company was healthier than it had been in a decade, probably healthier than it had ever been. She had heard about the others the way she always heard things, through Robert, through Vivian, through the general hum of an industry where nothing stayed quiet for long. Darius's will contest had lasted 45 days. Robert's preparation had been so thorough, so layered with documentation. Sound mind, multiple witnesses, the forensic trail, years of it, that Darius's attorney had withdrawn the challenge without proceeding to a hearing. The civil exposure from the embezzlement had not disappeared with the contest. It had cost him. She did not follow the details. She did not need to. Andre's name still circulated in regional construction circles, but not in any way that helped him. The story of the Meridian deal, a man who signed an NDA representing authority he simply did not have, was the kind of story that followed a person through an industry built entirely on whether a man's word meant anything. He had cycled through ventures since. None of them had taken hold. Renee and Greg's marriage had not survived the fallout from the Nashville inquiry. Greg's investment group, facing their own legal questions from the botched approach, had needed someone to absorb the blame. Greg had turned to Renee. Lorraine had registered that information when Vivian shared it, and then she had moved forward. The way you move forward when something confirms what you already understood about a person's choices. Camille had lost her CPA license 18 months after the family meeting, in a professional review proceeding that drew on the forensic findings. She had relocated. She had not reached out. Lorraine kept 3 birthday cards from her grandchildren in the top drawer of her desk at the Memphis office. 2 from Renee's children, 1 from Darius's oldest. Simple cards, the kind children pick without adult guidance, animals, bright colors, uneven handwriting inside. She had written back to each of them. Brief notes, warm ones, signed Grandma Lorraine. The generation-skipping trust was documented and waiting, patient as everything she had ever built. She had taken the Portugal trip in October. 10 days. Vivian and 2 women Lorraine had known since her 30s. Women who had watched her build this thing from the very beginning and never once asked her what she intended to leave them. They ate well. They walked along the water in Lisbon at dusk. Lorraine had bought a postcard at a small shop near the harbor, a photograph of the city at dawn, all pale stone and orange rooftops and the river beyond, and she had carried it home in her bag without sending it to anyone. It sat on her nightstand now. She had decided it was hers. The site foreman met her at the trailer door. His name was Marcus, and he was 29 years old and deeply serious about concrete, which Lorraine appreciated more than she ever said aloud. "Good morning," he said. "You want the lift or the stairs?" She looked at him. Then she looked at the stairs running up the outside of the scaffold frame, 12 flights of open metal grating rising into the dark. She took the stairs. The climb was steady. Her left leg was not what it had been before the fall, and it never would be. She had stopped minding. At the top, slightly winded, she turned and looked out over Nashville spread beneath her. The cranes, the streetlights still burning, the first faint suggestion of gray at the eastern edge of the sky. The frame of the building surrounded her, steel and geometry, the outline of something that did not exist yet. Marcus climbed up behind her, slightly out of breath himself. "About the concrete pour schedule," he said, pulling out his clipboard. "Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day."